Christ is in our midst. Heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of Truth, present in all places and filling all things, come and dwell in us, cleanse our sin, and save our souls, O gracious Lord. All right. So, before we begin, has anybody read this book before?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So without spoiling anything, because obviously we're going to go chapter by chapter, what was moving about it to you, and why are you excited for us to study this book?
He was a phenomenal man as a priest who anybody should want to emulate. I mean, I'd say he's almost a modern day saint. I think some of the modern saints, their stories are not even as amazing as his, and the things he overcame, and all the trials and tribulations, and he didn't let anything get him down.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I also felt like when you read this, you think like, you may think you're a good Orthodox Christian, but you read this and you think, whoa, and you're whining about, little things in life and what this man went through and the inspiration he was to other people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it just helped you in your life, realize that the little minor things are nothing, and as long as you have God with you, in your heart, how can I word that? It's like a lot of people who had issues, like during the pandemic and everything, and other people, the different things that happened, I keep thinking that they didn't have God in their families, and if they did, then maybe these things wouldn't have affected them as such, like they did. I'm not sure how to word that one, but...
No, you did well. So we're going to go through each of the pericopes of Father Arseny, and Father Arseny is a book that is comprised of recollections of his spiritual children, some of whom are characters that we are going to meet during the narration. Others are people that are going to be introduced to us later in the notes of his spiritual children. This character of Father Arseny is interesting because there have been some people that have posited that no such person actually exists, although we know that that's not true. This is somebody that exists and shows us an epoch of spirituality in a place that is horrific. He existed in a time when orthodoxy was forbidden. He exists during a time where Stalin murdered millions of Orthodox Christians. There were more Christian martyrs under Stalin than all of the centuries combined after Christ. That's just how horrible it was for the Christians during this period, at a period where atheism was basically the religion of the state. And so it's very, very important that we understand this backdrop of it's very, very important that we understand this backdrop of what was happening and why it was happening. That the people that were in power wanted to get rid of any kind of intelligentsia. And so this is important, as we will see later on in understanding Father Arseny's background, that anyone that had any kind of intelligence was considered an enemy of the state, because anyone with intelligence would be able to rile up the people against them. So they wanted dumb masses. We also see that there was betrayal left and right. No one could trust anybody. And so it was a very, very dark time in history, even for those that were supposedly in power. And so let's go ahead and begin with the first section called the prison camp. So the prison camp basically sets the scene for us of what we are actually experiencing. And so, for those of us that read the book for this first pericope, what does this kind of point to you? How does this seem to you, especially when we compare it to what we go through today and what we've experienced today? This Siberian gulag, this kind of the opening overture of giving us the scene of the prison camp.
Hopelessness.
Mm-hmm. So whether it's the darkness, the light of the turrets going back and forth, the automatic machine guns, the dogs that are growling, it is a very, very dark and horrible place. It is a place where people have been sent to die. They've been sent to die slow, painful, horrible deaths, both normal prisoners and political prisoners. And political prisoners are, of course, the mainstay here, because anyone that was considered an enemy could be sent to one of these camps to quietly get rid of them. And once you were sent to one of these camps, essentially your name was erased. You didn't exist anymore. It was anticipated that you were going to die, that you would not last very long. And so this was a lot of slave labor where they were mining, where they were doing cutting down lumber, specifically to supply the war efforts. Now, the second one, we go into the barracks. And what do we learn about the barracks?
The criminals were in charge, it seemed, right?
The criminals were in charge, but right away we see a sort of a different understanding here. There's a prisoner here that is with Father Arseny, and what is Father Arseny doing in this first introduction to him? How are we introduced to Father Arseny? What is he doing?
He's cleaning barracks and keeping the fires going so that everybody else will survive.
Correct. And we see even here, because as we'll learn later on, that Father Arseny, obviously, even before this, was a very spiritual, very holy man. But we see a development in Father Arseny. What is his stress? What is his worry? What is the conflict that he is dealing with right here as he is cleaning up the barracks in this first chapter? What's his task? What's his job?
Well, he's trying to split wood without an axe.
Mm-hmm.
As he's doing, it seems impossible to split wood with just a piece of wood. But he constantly is saying the Jesus prayer and everything constantly.
So basically, he's taking a metal wedge, putting it against the piece of wood, and then taking another piece of wood and then slamming it against it to try to split the wood, because obviously an axe would be considered a very dangerous weapon in there. And of course, as we'll see later, it's not that there's lack of weapons amongst the prisoners, but so he's trying to split wood. Why is he trying to split wood?
He needs to put that in the fire, and then he needs kindling in order to do the fire, and that's hard to find. Dry kindling.
Correct. So basically, he's dealing with damp logs of wood. They're in the middle of Siberia. The weather is frigid. It's in the negative double digits. His job is to make sure that the barracks are warm when the workers come back from their work. Otherwise, he's going to be beaten. He's used to getting beaten, and he's worried about getting beaten. And so what did he do with this dry kindling? What did he try to do to help himself?
He hid it.
He hid it. So this is where we're seeing a little bit of the development of Father Arseny. He hid the kindling. And what happened to his hidden kindling?
Somebody put water all over it. But I don't know if it was other criminals, or do you think the guards did that?
It doesn't say. But it basically is showing us the ugliness of the human condition. That, even though it's against everyone's best interest, just to mess with this man, they poured water on the dry kindling. Now, he's in a panic. He's trying to get wood, trying to get kindling. And so he's running around trying to do something. And what happens? Who does he encounter?
one of the worst criminals in there.
One of the worst criminals in there. And what does that worst criminal do?
He actually ended up giving him kindling.
He ended up giving him kindling. And how did Father Arseny know that he could trust him? Because he probably thought, Father Arseny thought, this man is going to blackmail me, he's going to hurt me. What gave Father Arseny pause to say, you know what? I think I can trust this man.
He called him Father instead of his...
instead of calling him Pops.
Yeah.
So he called him Father Arseny and gave him the wood. And then what did Father Arseny do as he was cleaning up and as he had the extra kindling? A thought occurred to him to hide it again, but what did he end up doing?
Just laid it right by the fire.
He laid it right by the fire. What was this showing us his development as a person? Because this is early in his time at the Gulag.
That he was going to let God take care of things?
Exactly. He was going to let God take care of things. That he was going to learn to trust in God and not try to circumnavigate the ugliness of man. There's a lot of ugliness in there. And so what else is he doing as we're being introduced to Father Arseny in these barracks? What is he doing aside from just cleaning?
Well, he's praying constantly, nonstop.
He's praying constantly. But who else is in there with him right now? In the barracks.
Well,
Graybeard?
Hmm?
Graybeard?
Graybeard, yes. And who else?
Well, the sick prisoners that were so bad they can barely move. They're about ready to die.
Exactly.
And he's taking care of them.
And what's their response to him taking care of them?
I don't know if they at the beginning were very appreciative, were they? That was the impression I got. At first.
No, and they were kind of ambivalent because keep in mind, everyone that's being sent here is being sent here to die. And several of these people have been transferred from other prisons, and so they are, they're recognizing that they're going to die here. That this is the fate that has been given to them, and they are not happy about that. They are afraid, and so they're sick, they're worried, and one of them even says, "What do you expect to get out of me? I've got nothing for you to take." And what was Father Arseny's response to this person?
I don't want anything from you.
Exactly. I'm doing this for you.
He also, in that first portion, Graybeard was like helping him. I don't know if Graybeard, I don't know why he helped him. You think Graybeard was like something inside of him helped him?
This is something we'll get to it at the end of today. Hopefully we'll get to it. I wanted us to get to Mother of God, Do Not Abandon Them, which is kind of a nice break-off point. But what we're seeing is that there is still a spark of goodness in people. That even the people that are hardened criminals, there is still something good. And that is one of the reasons why this work is so important and so special, is because it's not just this idea of showing a dichotomy between somebody very holy like Father Arseny and someone very rapacious and a rapscallion like Graybeard. It's the idea that everyone in and of themselves is able to repent, is able to recognize God and holiness through the works of another person. And so the idea is that the grace of God through people changes people. And so one of the real powerful messages that we're going to keep encountering as we read is how people change by being around a good person. And so these individuals they're curious, they're wondering why he is doing this. And keep in mind that for a lot of these people, because especially the young ones, they've never experienced anything good. What clergy they've encountered have either been ignorant or have been taking advantage of the state. So they've seen hypocrisy, and so atheism is the rule. And when there's atheism, there is no hope. There's just the idea that everyone is out for themselves. Everyone is just trying to live their life as best they can and get as much out of it as they can. So the idea of doing something for another person just for the sake of doing it for the other person seems strange to them. They don't recognize this kind of goodness. And so many of the people will say, I don't believe in God. And we get to the point eventually where we're going to hear people say, I still don't believe in God, but I believe in you. because they're seeing God through Father Arseny. And so Father Arseny is trying to help people. All the while, what is happening to him by the prison guards?
Well, they were beating him.
Yes, they're beating him. And the individuals in the tent there, the patients, are wondering, why are you even bothering? They're just beating you. Now, one of the people that he is helping is named Sazakov. And one of the things that we see is, and this is kind of one of the things that we see in the saints, is that Father Arseny has the gift of clairvoyance. And how do we see that in the person of Sazakov in this section of the patients? Sazakov is mocking Father Arseny for praying. What's good is your praying going to do for you? He said, "You're praying, priest? You pray to get forgiveness of your sins, and this is why you help us? You're afraid of God. Why is that? Have you ever seen him?" So the idea is that they're trying to rationalize why Father Arseny is doing what he's doing. And so Sazakov is thinking, I think I figured it out. This man has done some horrible things and he feels guilty, and so he's trying to get forgiveness by doing good deeds. And so by doing that, he's going to try to rectify his life and be seen as good by God. But it's a joke, because you've never seen God. You don't know that God is ever going to forgive you. And then Father Arseny turns around and does something that basically makes the hackles on Sazakov's neck stand on end. What does he do? It's a very powerful moment. It's a changing moment. And Sazakov's reaction is very telling of what happens when we encounter holiness. Father Arseny looked at Sazakov with surprise. "How could I not have seen him? He is here among us and unites you and me." "What are you saying, Pop? God is in this barracks?" he laughed. Father Arseny looked at him and said quietly, "Yes, I see his presence. I see that your soul is black with sin, but there is room in it for light. Light will come to you, Sazakov. Light and your saint. Saint Seraphim of Sarov will not abandon you." Sazakov's face distorted. He trembled and whispered with hatred, "I'll kill you, silly priest. I'll kill you. I don't know how you know things. I hate the way you think." Now, why this reaction? Why is Sazakov so upset? Why is he reacting with hatred and anger at what Father Arseny has said to him? Is it because Father Arseny said your sins are black?
Because maybe he was upset. I don't know, because he did say that there was a flicker of light.
He knows.
Does he not understand?
He's upset because Father Arseny knows his baptismal name.
Oh, I didn't get that. Yes, you're right. But why don't you say something? I didn't get that. I was wondering. Yes.
And Saint Seraphim of Sarov is a very important saint. He's the saint that basically told us that our primary care should be the acquisition of the Holy Spirit, to acquire the fruits of virtue. And of course, we're going to see as Sazakov develops that he will develop these things. But he is reacting in anger. Why is he reacting in anger? At the fact that his sins have been revealed to him, that who he is as a person has been revealed. He's completely naked in the sight of Father Arseny. And that reaction of anger is a natural one where you feel exposed, you feel humiliated. But more than that, it's the evil that is in Sazakov, the demons that are and have been ruling his life are pressuring him, saying, "This is bad. You're in front of somebody that can get rid of us, that can get rid of the evil in us." Now, it could have very easily gone a different way, but we're going to see Sazakov begins to soften because he is seeing the reality of God in Father Arseny. And more importantly, the idea that the saints are real as well. So what we're seeing in the patients and the in this section is basically how people have come to be here. So we see that there are a lot of political prisoners. There's a lot of criminal prisoners. And so in this chapter of the Patience, we're introduced to basically the two main characters outside of Father Arseny for the first section. And they are Sazakov and Azenkov. Now, who is Azenkov?
He's the political prisoner, right?
He's a political prisoner. Now, what makes him even more of an interesting prisoner regarding Father Arseny? There's a connection there.
No, he was a commissary at one time.
But he's the one who sentenced him.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's the reason. He's the reason Father Arseny is there.
Yes, but I think it was first they sentenced him to death, and then he supposedly commuted the sentence, which sounds like it's a worse sentence, to be sent to the gulag.
Correct. Yeah. And Father Arseny is, as he's talking to Azenkov is recognizing that this man is, he's good, he's just, and he likes him. And then he's confused when Father Arseny recognizes him. And Father Arseny tells him all these things, that you're the one that sentenced me. Now, what do we notice about Azenkov? What's changed in him? Because we're seeing kind of a dichotomy here between Sazakov and Azenkov. Now, Azenkov, he probably killed, and was responsible for killing probably hundreds of thousands of people. I mean, that's the extent of the depravity of what he has done as somebody that was signing people's death warrants, essentially sending them here or sending them to firing squads. But what is he doing now? How is Azenkov behaving in the camp?
I'm better than anybody else.
So he's got kind of a repentful spirit. He's recognized that he has done great harm, and so he is trying to do good. So he is that kind of person that Sazakov was talking about Father Arseny, the idea of saying that I've got to redeem myself because I feel guilty. Now, the difference, of course, is that Azenkov is a complete party line communist, atheist, 100% party line all the way. He does not believe in God, but he does believe that he has done great harm and done great wrong, and so he is trying to redeem himself by being kind. And so he sees a kindred spirit in Father Arseny, and Father Arseny reveals their connection and that he does not blame him, but rather understands that God intended for them to meet, and that Azenkov's salvation is to be had in this relationship, that they were destined to meet so that they could be mutually saved. So what we're seeing here is these lines that God weaves, pushing people together, so that we can have our salvation, so we can have our redemption. Because you could very easily see somebody going, oh, karma's a great thing, isn't it? Look at you here. You who signed all these death warrants, and now here you are sentenced to die. And again, this is a telling of just how mercurial everything was at this time. That you could be at the top of the state, signing death warrants one day, and the next day, you're in the gulags yourself. It was a horrible, horrible, horrible time. So next, we're going to look at Silly Priest. Now, this is a very fun little chapter. And what it does is it looks at the understanding of how the intelligentsia saw clergy at the time of this writing in communist Russia. And so how were clergy seen at that time?
Ignorant. Peasants.
Right.
Yeah. They knew nothing, supposedly.
I mean, we have to look at Karl Marx, when Karl Marx said that religion is the opiate of the masses. In other words, You're too dumb to think anything better, so you're going to just cling to your God. And so the idea is that the only reason why you're a priest or religious is because you're too dumb to recognize anything better. And so this was the understanding that the clergy were just ignorant, they were foolish, and many of them were corrupt and taking advantage of the state, and that's why the largesse of the church was basically seen as an evil at the time. Now, what happens in this section is we see what people are doing to try to keep themselves human and to try to have a semblance of normalcy. So what are they doing, particularly those that have educated backgrounds?
Well, one was a professor having a discussion of art and
Right.
history.
So they're trying to basically keep themselves sane by having intelligentsia discussions about art, about history, about architecture. And so they've got a professor there that is enjoying his privilege and talking about art and history, and he wants to shame what he thinks is a silly priest. And so he asks Father Arseny a detailed question about how Orthodoxy has affected Russian art from antiquity and architecture. And Father Arseny ducks the question. What does he say?
Well, I've got to finish my work, and I'll come answer after I'm done.
So Father,
Did he say that he'd come answer after he's done? He said he had work to do.
Yeah.
he said he would answer when he's done with his work. And everyone looked at it and said, well, you know what? That priest may not be smart, but at least he's smart enough to know not to have himself humiliated in this way. And then Father Arseny comes back and he gives a extremely orthodox lecture on the nature of iconography, spirituality, Russian history, and basically gives a 2-hour lecture, and they discover what about Father Arseny? What was his past?
Extremely educated.
Yeah.
That he was one of the foremost art historians of Russia with several published works.
They didn't know his other name.
Correct. And so obviously we could look at this, the idea is, don't judge a book by its cover, but it's the idea here that is important is that what does Father Arseny say about being a priest? Because they're looking at him as the exception to the rule, and what is Father Arseny trying to explain to them?
Well, in the development of Russia, if it wasn't for the Orthodoxy, basically, they wouldn't have developed at all. It wasn't until later when there was immorality that things went downhill. But the Orthodoxy was responsible for all the beautiful architecture, the holy images and all the things around that they consider beautiful art.
Correct. And he totally schools the professor and shows his hypocrisy and shows that he's wrong in a great many of his assertions about art and history, in particular the idea of the beneficiaries of the arts, and basically talking about how Orthodox iconography, they basically say written by and by the hand of, because they don't want credit for the art that they have done and that they've given, because it is a prayer. But what is important about what Father Arseny is doing here is he is showing that in order to be an effective priest, you have to know your flock. So in other words, the idea of the ignorant priest is a fallacy here, in that every priest should be educated. Father Arseny is trying to show, I am not an exception to the rule. Rather, this is how priests should be. Priests should know art. They should know history. They should know philosophy, because they have to be able to explain to their flock about these things, to be able to extrapolate for them. Otherwise, how are you supposed to be a good pastor for them? And so the idea is that Father Arseny is trying to show that I'm not an exception to the rule because I happen to be an extremely educated person and you misjudge me, but you've misjudged the priesthood itself and what it means to be a real priest.
And Father, it also seemed like, I was looking at the last sentence here, that some of them were thinking back to their childhood, like the last sentence here, who said that Zazakov was saying that about the fact that he lives in God's to do good, not for his own benefit, but for the sake of others. He says, my mother was like that, He said this and left. But I think this was not the first time, but then, they start to think back to their childhood and remember that maybe their mother brought them to church or something, and it brings, it's bringing them forward that they were introduced, but it was totally forgotten and left.
Now, what you're bringing up is a very important thing because we're going backwards. We're going to see the same thing that you just mentioned with many of the prisoners. It's the idea of returning to childhood. Now, why is this important, this idea of childlike faith? Christ says that unless you have the faith as a little child, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven, which means that this childlike faith, this rekindling, is that spark that is inside each of these prisoners is being reunited from their youth to this present time. And so it is going backwards in time and igniting in them this passion that they remembered from their childhood. Now, we're going to have a very, very powerful moment with Stop This. Now, what happens in this particular section is it became very, very cold, and the rations are only what they are. So they're not able to go outside right now because it's extremely cold. And the prisoners have their rations stolen by the criminal element, and a fight is about to break out. And people are screaming, they're dying. And what does Father Arseny do?
He just gets in the middle and says...
Before that.
What did he do before that?
Well, he asked the leader to stop them. Right.
He goes to Sazakov, who is one of the leaders of the criminal elements. Because remember, you've got there's basically two camps. You got the political camp, and that's Azenkov's group, and then you've got Sazakov's group, which is the criminal element. The criminal element are the element that has violence, and they're the ones that pretty much get their way through beating people up, through stealing things, and this fight, which started as fisticuffs, it graduated into clubs, and now the knives are out, and people are dying. There are dead people here. And so Father Arseny goes to Sazakov and says, you have the power to stop this because, you're the chief amongst the criminal element. They respect you. Put a stop to this. What does Sazakov do?
Well, I sort of makes fun of him in a way and tells him, something about have your God.
Yeah, have your God stop
it. Mm-hmm.
Right, so it's this idea, and this is very popular amongst the atheistic understanding, is that, you have faith in God, God will protect you, right? And so it's this idea of you're so stupid that you believe in God. Why don't you have your God stop this? Basically, trying to school the priest to say this is the reality of life. You can't stop this. You can't understand this, but this is what it is. You have to understand that people are going to kill each other. People are going to have survival of the fittest, and your God doesn't care. So what does Father Arseny do? He goes right in the middle of the fighting and says, you will obey me and you will stop this. And what happened?
They stopped.
They stopped. And what did he do?
He started praying.
He started praying. He went off to the side and started praying while everyone was moving the dead bodies and tending to the wounded. And what did Sazakov make of this moment? What happened? This is a very important moment for Sazakov.
It says that he doubted, that he asked for forgiveness for doubting his God, Father Arseny's God.
Correct. This is where he is understanding that, okay, wow, this should not have been possible. They should not have listened to him. This could only happen by God through Father Arseny. And so he says, I'm sorry I doubted you. And from this moment on, we're seeing that Sazakov is, even if he doesn't believe yet, he is respecting that that God is real.
Like he seems to think he's accepting. He's saying that God exists, but he still doesn't believe in him.
Right.
Which I can understand, really, because how can you know if God exists? How can you not believe in him?
You have to understand from Sazakov's point of view, and we'll see later in the book that Sazakov has a very, very, very dark past. When you've been exposed and around such evil your whole life, and all you've ever known is this darkness, it's very, very hard to believe in a God that exists in the midst. Like, how in the world do you make sense of evil and good coexisting at the same time, where there doesn't seem to be any power of good? We see this even in today's, entertainment, whether it's movies or books, television. Evil always is the good. And even if people doing their Lord's Prayer or having crosses does nothing in the face of evil. Evil always wins in the end. And so when we have that kind of dark understanding of the world, how can you believe in God? How can you accept that God is real? And so God feels like a joke. It's only when you experience moments like this where you see the power of God manifested in a way that just blows your mind, that's where you're able to take a step back and go, okay, I need to reassess. And it's a process. It's not a suddenly everything changed and now I'm a different person. This is a process as they are growing into who they're going to be. And this is where we're going to see now Sazakov had his moment. Now we're going to have Asenkov's moment with the next section, a summon to the major. So typically what would happen if you were getting summoned to the major of the camp?
Probably going to get killed. It's not a good thing.
That are beaten.
You're going to
Well, they're going to accuse you of things, and then you will end up saying, yes, I did that, even though you didn't. Because they would beat you till you did it.
Correct. You are either going to be made to turn in secrets, you're going to accuse you of peddling propaganda in the camp. You're pretty much done. And so if you're being summoned to the powers that be, that means that something terrible has happened. So this is seen as a very, very bad thing for Father Arseny, that he has been summoned by the major. And it's not made any better by the fact that the first officer that he encounters pretty much berates him, beats him up, says, "We know what you did," and which is their standard thing for everything, that we have proof, before finally sending him to the major. And what do we find out about Asimov, Abarasimov, the major?
Well, that he's actually a good man, and that he actually had a note from the nun. I think it was Vera.
Vera, yeah.
But he had, he was able to get this. He was able to get this. Did he want this? Yeah, he wanted this position. But I can't remember.
So he didn't want this position. This is a very bad position. He's been demoted. He used to be hired.
That's right. Somebody, the way it goes at those places, he was demoted, right? But he was a good person. He tried not to be. It sounded to me like he did. He tried not to be too bad.
He was trying to be a human being, in a world where being a human being can get you killed. Now, why is he willing to put his neck on the line for Vera?
Vera saved his wife's life.
It wasn't just his wife's life. It was his child. Because what is Vera? Vera is a nun, and she is Father Arseny's most beloved spiritual child. So of all his spiritual children, Vera is like his number one child. But she's also a doctor, and so she saved the major's daughter. And because of that, what happened to the major's wife's faith?
Well, the major's wife's faith was strengthened.
Now, correct. So we're seeing all these atheists that are encountering God in these people changing. And so the major's wife became Christian and has declared that we're going to do whatever we can for Vera. But the connections go even deeper. What is the major's relationship to another person in this camp? Because first he did something what seemed very amazing to Father Arseny. He risked his life to get this letter to Father Arseny from Vera, but now he's going to ask Father Arseny to risk his life to do something for the major. What is that he's going to do for the major?
Oh, he had a note for another. Which prisoner was that? That
Well, he was a general, wasn't he?
He was a general.
He was run by his troops.
He was. And which political figure did this general answer to? Arseny.
Oh.
So the leader of the political prisoners, the one that had signed Father Arseny's death warrant, basically, is a dear friend of the major. And so the major wants Father Arseny to bring a note to him from his wife.
Right. Which is very dangerous.
Correct.
What with any of those notes?
And to basically give him hope, to say there are still people in Stalin's court that are trying to get you out. But in the meantime, it's really, really bad. Because what other person is in the camp that is a big, big problem?
Was that the one, not the major, but the person below, right below that he met?
Well, that guy's annoying, and he's unscrupulous, and that they will have that changed. But there's another prisoner other than Sazakov, who's another leader amongst the criminal element, who is just sadistic. You know what? Remember his name? Ivan the Brown.
Oh, that's right.
And so yes. Ivan the Brown is one of the more nefarious criminal elements who has no problems killing people. And so they are trying to, the outside political elements are trying to basically pay off Ivan the Brown to murder Arseny, so that he doesn't get out of prison and return to his power under Stalin's government. So there's all this political intrigue now going on, and the major is tasking this on Father Arseny to basically bring this message of potential hope. Not really hope, because the major is basically saying also, I can't do anything. All these eyes are on me, and people fear me, and they think I'm a horrible person, but there's really not much I can do. And that's very reminiscent of Schindler from Schindler's List, where he was seen as this evil person out of necessity, even though he was trying to do the right thing in the end.
Well, I can't remember, did the note also include like people he should be aware of?
Well, I mean, Ivan the Brown being the main one, but yes, that there were other political factors that were trying to basically get rid of him.
But it got me too that they said basically to swallow the note.
Yes, because if that gets found, you're dead. And so now we're going to see that life goes on. And so all this stuff kind of happened in the first couple of years. So life is going on, and what is actually we're seeing is that Father Arseny is doing what he does, and he's changing people. And so the people around him are being changed. But what is also happening is we're seeing the reality of the camp, and what is happening to the majority of the prisoners around Father Arseny.
Getting sick and dying.
They're getting sick and they're dying. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. This camp is a place for people to die. And we're going to see that very powerfully in the next section. So all these people are coming in. People are dying left and right. And so Father Arseny is now going to get himself in trouble in a very, very dramatic way in this pericope where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name. And this is where we get introduced to the third main character. So now we're going to have a third dynamic. So we've got the criminal element in Sazakov. We've got the political element in Arseny. And now we're going to have the student element in Alexei. So Alexei is a young kid. He's in his 20s. And what happens to him?
Well, he simply gets in a card game with Ivan the Brown.
He gets in a card game with Ivan the Brown because he came fresh from another prison. He's got brand new clothes. And Ivan the Brown basically says, you're going to play me for, you're going to We're going to gamble for your clothes, which, bad idea. And did Alexei understand what was happening?
No, of course not. No, he thought it was just, for fun.
He thought it was just a silly game. And what ends up happening? Ivan starts beating him with an inch of his life. Having fun with it. And then what happens? He pulls out his knife. He's going to kill Alexei. And what happens?
Father Arseny comes in and I don't know how he had the strength, but slapped his arm and the knife dropped from him.
Right. It almost looks like a scene out of an action movie. He knocks the knife out of his hand and then shoves Ivan the Brown back, and Ivan the Brown hits his head. Which, of course, should have been a death sentence for Father Arseny, because you do not stand up against the number one criminal in the camp. And so everyone's thinking he's dead. So what ends up happening?
Well, the guards, I guess, come in, but they accuse only the kid and Father Arseny of fighting.
Correct. Why is that?
Why did they?
Who called the guards?
Oh, was it Ivan? Ivan did, yeah.
Ivan the Brown said these two were fighting and brought in the guards.
Right.
What's the punishment that they're going to have for fighting?
Right, they're going to be putting, basically a death sentence in this, metal hut.
Right, in a 1 yard by 2 yards hut outside the gate that's lined with sheet metal. And outside it's negative 22 degrees. And as he's being led out, everyone is upset. All the political prisoners and all of the criminal prisoners that are under Sazakov, they're all livid because they know what this means. They know that this is a death sentence for Alexei and Father Arseny, that they're basically being led out to be killed. And so they are screaming at the guards, "You can't do this, it's going to kill them." And what happens to Azenkov and Sazakov for standing up to the guards? They get beaten up. They get thrown against the wall. And so they're let out. Now, during this, Ivan the Brown hangs his head because he realizes something by basically creating the death sentence of these two men.
You're not supposed to attack, what's it called? You're not supposed to rat out or whatever that's called.
Right. Basically, ratting somebody out to the guards is like the lowest of the low. And it's bad enough, but now you're essentially killing everyone's favorite person. Like, Father Arseny is almost like the mascot of the barracks. You're killing their favorite person, and it's not just one faction in the barracks; it's multiple factions. So his assessment is, "I'm going to die for this." Yeah. So meanwhile, they're being sent out to the cell, and they're being put in the cell for 48 hours. Now, normally people are put in the cell for 24 hours. And what is the only way to stay alive in that cell?
Jumping up and down.
Jump up and down for 24 hours. If you stop jumping, you die. Now, the problem is, Alexei has been beaten with an inch of his life. He's not going to be able to jump. Father Arseny is a frail, older gentleman. He's not going to be able to jump. So essentially, this is their death sentence. And as they're put in this cell, and the air is so cold that it is literally sucking the air out of their lungs because it's so cold, Alexei is in a panic. He's going to die. Now, is Alexei Christian?
No.
I don't think so.
No. He was baptized, but his family was, because his grandparents were Christian, but his family, they baptized him out of obligation. We see that a lot in today's society, but they were never religious. He's never really experienced church or God. And so he just thinks we're dead. Meanwhile, Father Arseny starts to pray. And he says something profound to Alexei. What does he say to Alexei that seems to be so profound?
2 or 3 are gathered. Right.
That does touch Alexei, and Alexei keeps repeating it too, which is one of the reasons why what is going to happen happens. But he says, finally, we can pray out loud in this camp. Because every other time Father Arseny has been able to pray, it has to be quietly, softly to himself in a corner. Now, for once, he can pray strongly and out loud. And as he's praying, what's happening to Alexei? Because Alexei is acting as the audience for this. He's kind of our stand-in of explaining what's happening.
He's staying warm and feeling at peace.
The cold starts to finally leave, and he thinks, I'm dying, I'm going insane. And then he notices that the cell has changed. What happened?
It seems bigger and seems to be lit. There's light.
It seems to be lit, and then suddenly, where does he find himself?
Well, eventually he finds himself in church.
They're in a church. And what's happening with Father Arseny? Is he wearing his prison outfit anymore?
Wearing vestments.
No, he's wearing vests.
And it's the same. And what's interesting is that we're seeing this from the eyes of a person who is not a devout Christian. He's been to church once, and he remembered how the priests were dressed. And so he's saying, oh, he's dressed like those priests were dressed. And then he sees 2 other priests whose faces are shining in light, worshiping with Father Arseny. So there's 2 saintly priests that are worshiping with Father Arseny. And he suddenly realizes that he's not alone. And who comes and talks to him?
His mother.
His mother.
Oh, that's right.
And what does his mother tell him? Alexei says, you believe too? What did his mom tell him? She said, when you were taken, finding God was the only way I didn't lose my mind. And so she now is truly believing. And so with this whole, when 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, it's not just Father Arseny that is praying with Alexei right now. Who else is praying with Alexei?
His mother.
His mother.
Well, I thought the 2 people that were attending Father Arseny were angels. Am I wrong in that assumption?
No, they weren't angels. Those were clergy.
Clergy, okay.
But we're also seeing, and this happens again in the chapter following this, is they're also all the people that have asked Father Arseny to pray for them. They're all there too. And so we are seeing the
the people that were actually, those were dead people, right?
No, not in this case. That's the later one.
Later one, okay.
Now, these are all the people that are alive asking for help.
That's right. I'm thinking of the other thing that happened.
Right.
Okay. Yes. They're all his children.
Right. Everyone that's asking for help, that needs prayers, they're all there right now praying too. They're all praying together. The idea that we're not alone, and as such, they're not cold. And Father Arseny even tells them, like, you know what, you're tired. Why don't you go to sleep?
Yeah.
And so, in the midst of this vision, of this experience, he takes a nap. He's still cognizant that he's in the cell because he's recognized that he's sleeping on the metal floor, while Father Arseny and his mother are praying with him. And then Father Arseny wakes him up saying, oh, they're here for us. Right. And so the major, the doctor, and the guards open up the gate, and they're furious because obviously this was cruel and unusual punishment. This is the kind of thing that if word got out that they had killed people like this, that's not the kind of thing that's gonna look good on the newspapers back home. That you murdered political prisoners in such a horrific, horrible way, because that is cruel and unusual punishment to kill someone like that. And the major is there too. And what does he say? He says, search them, because it's inexplicable. How are they warm?
They're looking for matches, probably.
They're looking for any kind of incendiary device, anything that would be able to keep them alive, because they should have been dead within 2 to 4 hours. And they're not. They're warm. And so when they come back and everyone asks them, how did you survive? Alexei, with Father Arseny, says it was God. Now, what does this show about Alexei? What is Alexei now with Father Arseny? What is Alexei now sworn to do? And it's kind of apropos for today's feast.
Oh, be his acolyte?
For all intents and purposes, it's almost like his personal puppy. Wherever Father Arseny is, Alexei wants to go. And when I say in regards to today's feast, who am I talking about?
St. John.
St. John the theologian, the beloved disciple, who, like Father Arseny's Alexei, wanted to be with Christ everywhere. So this is one of the most powerful moments in the book, where we see them preserved in that impossible situation. And it really shows us, again, the power of prayer, one, and the connectivity of all of us together. So next we have the Fair One. And the Fair One is the replacement lieutenant that is in charge of things. Now, why is he called the Fair One?
Well, he wasn't beating up everybody.
Wasn't beating up everyone. So basically, as long as you did what he asked, everything would be fine. Now, what happened to the Fair One that this pericope is about? What did he drop on the road?
Oh, his communist card?
His communist card.
Yeah.
And what is usually the sentence if you lose your communist card?
Execution.
Oh, yeah, execution, probably.
Yeah.
Really bad.
Kind of felt of recent years where if you lost your COVID card, you were done.
Well, yeah, right. Still carrying it, Father, just in case.
Because I found out the hard way. It's like, a photograph does not count. Oh, my goodness. But yeah, so Father Arseny finds his card and then gives it back to him. Now, what happens because of that? What was the Fair One's response?
I'm on my way, you silly priest.
But he thought he was going to be asking him for all kinds of things.
Right. And so what was the rest of the prisoners, when they're talking about this, what was their expectation of what could happen to Father Arseny as a result of this? Because the Fair One has a certain amount of privilege and power. And what could happen to Father Arseny?
Well,
Accidents can happen.
Yeah.
Because if Father Arseny was to ever tell anybody that the Fair One lost his card, this would be, a death sentence for the Fair One. So it would have been very easy for the Fair One to say, okay, I need to get rid of this witness. So speaking of accidents happening, what happened to Ivan the Brown after the incident?
A rock supposedly fell on him.
All right, a rock fell on him and crushed him to death. And it was rumored that the rock did not fall on its own accord.
Had a little help.
It had a little help from his friends. We're not, supposed to be exultant in the death of this man, but it does show that, in the midst of the miracle that happened, that there was also darkness, that someone thought, oh, they need to take revenge for Alexei and Father Arseny, despite the fact that neither of them would have wanted that. So even though Father Arseny did a good deed, his life is now in jeopardy by the Fair One because he gave him back his card, which is, again, just goes to show just how duplicitous and how horrible it is right now in this situation where you have to be watching your back for everybody, even someone that did something good for you. And so now we're going to get to the last section of today, and I kind of wish I'd included the section right after this as well for today's, because it's such a dichotomy. Michael, but we'll start with Michael next week. O Mother of God, do not abandon them. So this is a longer section. And it's appropriate that it's going to be our last section for today so that we can give it some breathing room. But what essentially happens in this? This is also a very different section because it switches off of the third person of Father Arseny and goes into the first person of Father Arseny. We're actually getting Father Arseny's perspective on what is happening. So what happens in this section?
Well, I think,
Against the floor. Right?
yeah, it was based on Father Arseny's own writing,
Mm-hmm.
and the author kind of spruced it up a little bit and then asked him to confirm everything that was in there.
Mm-hmm.
So we pretty much know that, yes, this is exactly what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I believe he said that not to put that in until after he passed.
Yeah.
Right. So basically, Father Arseny told this story. One of his spiritual children wrote it down and then brought it to Father Arseny and said, look over what I wrote, make sure it's exactly what you want. And Father Arseny made a couple of changes, but not much, and then basically said, tell people after I'm dead, but do not tell anyone until I'm dead. So what happened? And again, it's kind of appropriate that we talk about this because it's very similar to today's time period. What was going on in the camp?
Well, they had a flu epidemic.
They had a flu epidemic. And especially during that time period, because we're looking at the 20s, early 30s. What was not everywhere at the time of this epidemic? Penicillin, medicines, vaccines.
Vaccines.
So basically, the flu at that time was just as much as we look at now with COVID. I mean, it was a death sentence for a lot of people. And if you had a compromised immune system, you were going to die. And so, as it said, Father Arseny's turn. Because with an epidemic like that, it's going to hit everyone. Now, why were they not able to isolate? Because typically when there's an epidemic, you'd want to isolate patients. Why didn't they isolate them?
They're all in the barracks. There's no place else to put
Too
them.
many of them.
It's not just too many of them, but the idea was that they were pretty much sent there to die. And so the idea was that unless you couldn't work, you were going to work. And even if you were...
The temperature, they had to have,
104.
Otherwise, go to work. I mean, that was shocking, really. Because,
Right.
You feel sick yourself. If you had 100 or 101, you're not going to feel good. Can't imagine having to go to work then.
So basically, and what was the wonder drug that they were giving them? Aspirin.
Everybody gets aspirin.
As it any wonder, it didn't help. And they tried a couple of other colloquial things, mustard powder and jam, but obviously none of it was working. Father Arseny was getting worse and worse and worse and worse. In the meantime, Father Arseny is praying, and everyone is in a panic because they're cognizant of the fact that someone very, very special to them is about to die. And so they send word to the hospital. They pull every conceivable string they could pull. Finally, they get the head doctor to respond to them. And what was the doctor's response?
What, you think this is a sanatorium? That was awful.
It's like, how old is he? And how long has he been here? He's 49. He's been here for 3 or 4 years. Like, what? You expect him to live to 100?
Awful.
So, because we look at this now as 49, but at that time, it's like, if you live to be 49, it's like, well, you're doing pretty good. Especially now when I look at this and the idea that Father Arseny was an old man, it's like, I'm 40. I'm only 9 years younger than him. But anyway, this is because of the life in the Gulag and because of the extreme asceticism that Father Arseny practiced. But basically, he's been sentenced to die. And he does die. And what happens? A very, very interesting event.
He sees the light.
So he sees the light. He
away from his body. He realizes that he's has passed, and he's looking down at his body, and he does see a light, and he starts seeing? Does he see at this point? I'm trying to remember at this point. As he's walking around and he sees people's souls.
Mm-hmm. He sees individuals all over the camp. He sees people that are black as night. He sees people that are lights beyond lights. And what is that teaching him?
Well, basically, like you said before, you can't tell a book by its cover that these people that there's good people, and you don't realize it.
What it's showing Father Arseny is Father Arseny was he knew what he was doing, and he was cognizant of the miracles happening around him. But at the same time, he was looking only at himself. He was only seeing himself and his struggle and his journey and his spirituality, and he was not aware of what was going on around him, the saints that were around him, the people that were struggling around him, and their individual stories. And so he was recognizing his smallness in comparison to the other people. And that's why I'm annoyed with myself that I did not include the story of Mikhail with this, because they're paired together for a reason. So when we open up with Mikhail next week, we'll explain why. But he is seeing that there are people that are better than him. And he's amazed by this, that he somehow thought that he was alone and unique as a spiritual light. And it's important because when he's praying to God and telling God, don't abandon them, Mother of God, don't abandon them, it's almost as if he's saying, they can't make it without me. And that's where he's starting to recognize, I'm wrong. That there are people that are better than me. There are so many different things going on in that camp. But he, as a spiritual father, his whole ethos right now is for his friends and his spiritual children, he does not want them left alone. And so his prayer is constantly to Christ our God, do not let them be alone. Mother of God, don't abandon them. Mother of God, stay with them. And so where does he go? Where does the light lead him?
To his first church.
To the church where he first became a priest. And what icon is in there?
Mother of God.
Mother of God of Vladimir. And so he serves liturgy, and it's interesting because he doesn't just serve liturgy by himself. Who else serves liturgy with him?
A lot of other priests and
a lot of the priests and bishops and all the people that were dear to his heart that are all dead. So he's serving liturgy with all of the deceased clergy that he knows, including bishops and his spiritual father. And in the pews, who's in the pews?
His children that have passed.
All the people that he has touched that have passed. And what are they doing? What are his spiritual children in the pews doing? And it's very important because it's telling us what our loved ones are doing after they're dead. And, who are they praying for?
For him.
Not just for him. For their loved ones. They're asking him to pray for their loved ones. They are praying in church, despite the fact that they're dead, for their loved ones. And this is what happens when we die. That we are participating in liturgy. That we are still continuing to love our loved ones. And so Father Arseny is seeing all of these people, all of these saintly people around him, that are still praying, still active, despite the fact that they're dead. And so he is cognizant of their victory, but he's worried about the people back at the camp. And so what does he do? He prays to the Mother of God, don't abandon them, don't abandon them, don't abandon them. And even more than this experience of the liturgy, what miraculous thing happens?
Mother of God comes down from the icon in person.
She comes down from the icon, and what does she say?
But basically, your work's not done.
A, your work's not done, and what's most important?
I will not leave you.
I will not leave you. And what does she do? What physical thing does she do?
Touched you.
She touched him. She touches his forehead. She instills her grace into him. Her motherly ardor she gives to him and says, I will not abandon them. I will not abandon you. We have work to do. So he is going to act for her. And so he then, after getting his blessing, after getting the blessing from all of the other clergy, he goes back to his barracks, back to the bunk, lies down, wakes up, scares everybody around him.
Whoa.
And then with perfect love says, the mother of God has sent me back to serve you.
Oh my goodness.
And I love the what the author says, like, they were shocked, but not surprised. And then he recovered in a couple of weeks. And then after that, we're going to see what this changed experience has done to him. Because at this point, this is why I said it was very important that we understand what happened in the first chapter when he was hiding the wood. Because he was looking at everything as darkness around him, and so he was trying to be almost selfish in his understanding of humanity to try to protect himself and what's going on around him, to this sudden pericope change, this paradigm shift where now he's seeing the whole camp as it really is, and what that is going to mean in his ability to help people. Because this is a change. This near-death experience is a kind of a crucible for Father Arseny that is going to change his spirituality dramatically. And it is going to be informed by the very next chapter in his experience. Because again, as I said, he was going with the understanding that he was kind of by himself in this, and that he was a tool of the Lord, but that it's basically just him and that's it. And now he's recognizing that he is surrounded by spiritual people, and not just prisoners. What else did he notice? It was also guards and officers that also have the spark of God and are trying to live their best life possible, that are trying to be spiritual despite the evil that is going on around them. So he is seeing that it is a multifaceted, complex world that he was not quite aware of. So with our last 15 minutes, let's go ahead and open the floor for questions and comments.
Well, I thought it was interesting when he saw everyone's soul. He did see people that were bright, but he also saw people that maybe had a dark soul, but there was a little flame that was there, that little spark that maybe if someone came to help them, it would develop.
Yes, he was seeing people that if I could just talk to them, if I could just touch them, that spark could flame up. And unfortunately, he also saw people that their spark has been so doused that there's almost no hope of it coming back. For any of our other students on the call, does anyone else have any comments, thoughts, questions? And I am certainly glad that so many people tuned in today to hear about the story of Father Arseny. As I said before, it's an extremely inspiring story. For the people that are at St. Andrews, the book Father Arseny, we have multiple copies in the church office for $25. Just come and pick it up if you'd like a physical copy. Some people ordered their books online via Amazon. It's on Kindle. But this is one of those books that I read again and again and again when I look for inspiration. So I'm hoping that it's an enjoyable class for all of you, and I look forward to our continuing of this wonderful story of a true spiritual father in a time that in some ways mirrors our own. I can't remember, was it Mark Twain that said, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes? Because there are so many elements of what we are experiencing in today's culture that are echoed in this. And these are warnings sometimes for us as to what can happen if we're not careful. And so we need to understand that one of the things that becomes a bastion against such cruelty and against such horrors is being a genuine Christian. That these people are affected by the person of Father Arseny through his prayers, and not that he is, this exceptionally different person, but the idea that God's grace is found through other people. That when we encounter a person that is holy, it changes us. So if there are no other questions, then we'll go ahead and close our class for the night. I pray that everyone has a blessed and wonderful week, and we will continue with the next several chapters for next week. The syllabus is online on our page under the Adult Education section of the St. Andrews website for those that would like to know what chapters to read ahead for next week. Again, I pray that you have a wonderful, wonderful week. What was that? All right. Heavenly
Thanks,
King.
Father. Sorry I was late.
Not at all. I'm glad you made it. Heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of Truth, present all places and filling all things, come and dwell in us, cleanse every stain, and save our souls, O gracious Lord. Have a blessed and wonderful night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.